This is Call the Psychiatrist, the show where psychiatrists answer your questions. I'm Dr. David Handley.
And I'm Dr. Abby Snavely.
In this episode, a listener wants to know how to manage her boyfriend's need to get outside validation on most every decision, from sharing personal details of their relationship with his family to crowdsourcing information on the best pasta sauce. And then we'll try to make sense of an idea a listener came across that a patient must first view their therapist in a positive light, but eventually must learn to hate them. Listening to this podcast does not mean we have a doctor-patient relationship. Our intention is to educate and entertain you. Nothing we say is intended or recommended as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your own physician or other qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical questions or conditions. This first question comes from Sarah.
My boyfriend's family shares everything with each other and almost use it as an opportunity to groupthink and crowdsource advice or guidance, like a tribunal of sorts. I don't think they feel entitled to your information. It's just completely normalized that you call each other up every day and give everyone a download on what's going on with you. I've had to have several conversations with him over the last 3 years regarding him sharing private, personal information of mine or our relationship with them. Every time he defends it as well-intentioned and that he shares this information in the hopes of receiving guidance or support. It's gotten to the point where I've had to put my foot down and tell him that he cannot share my own information or information regarding us with his family without my consent first. He has begrudgingly agreed to it, but he always acts like this is completely normal and what healthy families do, and that I just think it's unusual and an invasion of privacy because of my hyper-independence and my own family's lack of emotional connectivity. However, this extends far beyond his family. He religiously resorts to crowdsourcing advice on even minor things via Reddit boards. I've told him 1,000,000 times we don't need to ask total strangers on the internet for their input or opinions on everything, especially things that don't require expert input, like what brand of pasta sauce we should get. But it's like he's addicted to getting outside validation. It's almost as if he's completely paralyzed by having to make a decision purely all on his own. As I look ahead to the future, I want to know I have a partner who can think for himself and we can come together to make decisions that are right for us without outside input. I don't want to spend the rest of my life consulting with Reddit users or seeing what his mom has to say before doing anything. How can we work through this?
So I think we're going to have to speculate what could be going on with the boyfriend so that we can have some empathy for him.
Do we? Because I was going to say, Sarah, it's not too late. You can run. You can get out of this and tell him to grow up on your way out.
So you have a strong opinion.
Well, I mean, I don't know. If Sarah's our patient, shouldn't we be on her side?
Well, yeah, but she wants to see if there's a way forward. Right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. We should probably assume that since Sarah is entertaining and smart and wrote a great question, that she's also partnered with somebody who has other good qualities.
You're definitely Team Sarah. I get it.
Well, okay. And I'm also team hyperbole, obviously. And yes, since Sarah wants the relationship to succeed, we'll see if we can make our way through this.
Okay. Well, I think there's two interrelated behaviors that maybe that's how we can approach this. There's the minimal boundaries with his family and the need for validation there. And then that seems to have been transmitted to needing other kinds of social approval.
Yeah, that sounds so fair and balanced.
Let's start with the family then. What do you think about this, his relationship with them and kind of what's going on?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with boyfriend off the bat. I don't think this is normal. I think this is right? Or even if it's normal, it doesn't mean it's healthy. Like,
it's not normal when the comparison group is Sarah's family.
That's right.
But I think it's just interesting that he pathologizes her relationship. Like, she's not just independent, she's hyper independent. She's not emotionally connected.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't think there's a problem here. So this is going to be a challenge.
Yes, you're right. And so some of this is, I do have questions. I assume that the boyfriend and Sarah are adults. I don't know how long boyfriend's been out of the house. It sounds like this norm has been set in his family. So you are correct. This is completely normal for his family. But this is an awful lot of contact that does leave me with the impression that he hasn't individuated. And maybe where someone needs to be is different if they're, 20 or 18 and out of the house for the first time versus if they're 45. But either way, it sounds like some boundaries, especially regarding Sarah's information or the relationship's information, could be better enforced. I mean, I think you said minimal boundaries. I'm like, where did you spot a boundary at all?
So I think you're right. There's an element, I think, before I could even say there's an excessive amount of dependency, we have to know more about the power structure within the family. Is it just him and siblings getting advice and approval from parents, or are the parents in the mix? Are aunts and uncles and cousins? I mean, it's one thing if the whole family system's doing it, or is it just the younger generation being dependent for some kind of approval? But you see what I mean?
That's a good point, right? But if it really is the family norm, yeah, you're right. If it's like a group chat with 20 people and it's like, where should I go on vacation this year? I guess maybe that's a fun question. But if it's like, what should Sarah do about her menstrual problems? Like that might be a little bit weirder.
I wondered too how Sarah felt about the fact that she was approved. I mean, every person in the family, every friend had to give some. There was at least a majority or plurality that said she was good enough for him.
That's right. That's right.
I wonder what feels like on her part.
And I definitely know situations where this wasn't the case and someone was confronted before they proposed by the family or whatever else. So yeah, Sarah, I mean, you should feel good that these people that know how to get expert opinions and the top of the line everything allowed you into their circle. I also want to know if is Sarah on the group chat, or is she only talked about?
I got this.
I think she's only talked about.
Yeah,
right, which is worse, right? It's like, it's truly everyone's hanging out without me.
Yeah, well, she would have shut them down, I think, if she'd been on that chat.
Well, I mean, I can speak from experience. There's actually a real blessing in being excluded from the in-laws group chat, but continue.
So I've worked with families like this before where there's enmeshment, there's very few boundaries. But in those cases, the lack of boundaries was a source of stress. I mean, people are upset, people's feelings are getting hurt, there's no privacy.
Right.
But in this scenario, as far as we can tell, the only problem that her boyfriend has is now in his dating life. He's dating an adult woman who's turned off by somebody with no independent ideas.
I mean, yeah, right. Go figure. And so, I mean, I think that's right. Like maybe this works for them. Maybe they are all happy. But yes, if it gets in the way of someone having a separate life at all, which is, where my mind jumps to, then it is an issue for this relationship. And I am trying to imagine what kind of, I don't know, healthy adult woman, as you said, would want to enter into this family mess. Again, being that this is the only thing we know about this man, I'm sure he's incredible in a million other ways. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to keep saying that.
In the effort of trying to be complete, I think Sarah would have mentioned if they came from different cultural backgrounds, but
yeah, that's a good point.
In the event that he was from a more collectivist society, then this would not be that abnormal. It would be pretty routine that you get consensus from older people, that you honor, you maintain the power structure. Grandmother says, I can't date this kind of girl, or the parents are approving of a certain job or a car. Again, I think this would be something that she would not be struggling with if that were the case, or she would struggle with it, but I don't think she would be looking for our approval at this point.
I mean, there is something that is not lost on me about Sarah crowdsourcing us about what to do, but we are obviously experts and better than the average Reddit user. So I'm just going to say that and keep it moving.
We should also get our listeners then to make this more crowdsourced. Listeners need to write in and weigh in on this situation and see. Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to be hard because if she tries to get him to change, then the family was going to perceive her as a threat because she's trying to isolate him from them, which means she's trying to hurt him. And then they're going to turn on her. They're going to get resentful. They're going to disapprove. And then he's going to have to choose between the two of them. And how can he possibly go against what the group is thinking?
I think that's right. I mean, I think this cannot be usefully positioned as a choose them or me situation from Sarah's standpoint.
No, but the family will make it that way.
Oh, yes. Yes.
If he's less reliant on them, they're going to see her as a problem. And he doesn't sound like he has the fortitude to actually stand up to that and say, well, actually, my own choice is that she's more important to me.
I think that's right. We're assuming that he also wants this relationship to work. He has been willing to make some concessions or try in different ways. But if they both together can agree, we want our life together to move forward. We want to have some version of our own life and family that would require some sort of boundary or some sort of separation, then maybe it could be framed for him not as rejecting his family, but as supporting what he wants as he moves forward in his life. You think that's wishful thinking?
So he's made concessions even though he doesn't think he's wrong. So he's got to have a little more of a buy-in to the idea. I mean, I think she's going to have to tell him, I don't know how you would say it, like, this doesn't turn me on, like you being this dependent. like this isn't attractive. Right? Like this is something that for us, to have this life together, I don't see how both can coexist, but I don't know how he's going to be able to pivot.
So Sarah's talking about looking into the future, wherein she would like to see the boyfriend as a partner, even if he's not yet. That to me says that they are at least enough of adults to be talking about the future, whether that's moving in together, doing something more official, maybe having a family. And so, this doesn't turn me on, but also this doesn't fit into my version of the future where together with my partner or husband, we get to make decisions for our family. That she's not, if she wants to partner up with him, she's not looking to partner up with all the aunts, uncles, cousins, parents, siblings, whatever.
I don't see how that would be compatible with his future. He wants a partner to join him in what sounds like what in his mind is just a very supportive family.
I wonder if she can come up with, I hear what you're saying. I wonder if she can think of times when it's actually been harmful. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I made a joke earlier, but it could be something personal about her. So that harmed her or violated her sense of privacy or autonomy. That's one thing, but that he doesn't necessarily have to care about. But kind of like you pointed out, Dave, there's got to be places where this has gotten messy and where there's dissent in the group or somebody in the family didn't go along with it. Is there fighting? Are there hurt feelings? Like, can she find real life places where this already isn't working?
I can't believe they're always in consensus.
Of course.
There's somebody's getting their feelings hurt occasionally.
Right. Or stuffing their feelings down or lying to do things behind people's back, right? Like there can be a number of ways to maintain the illusion of harmony within the group. And so if there's a way of spotting those things that maybe make him feel a little less personally attacked, or his family less personally attacked, but just like this system in general needs to be loosened up a little bit.
Or what about examples even just from the mundane? Like we were supposed 100%. To go to dinner and you got so caught up trying to figure out the right restaurant with the best reviews that we ended up, we had to cancel our plans or we were late. Maybe there's just something on the day-to-day in the relationship where this gets in the way.
Right. Or
that might be frustrating for both of them.
Is it wasting time? Do they, is he missing out on opportunities? Does he have to step out of a concert or a play they're at to weigh in on what sweater somebody should get? I don't know. There has to be an opportunity cost, right? He's obviously having probably a self-esteem, but definitely an autonomy cost. But I think you're right. I'm sure people are missing out on things, concrete things, in addition to missing out on probably learning what they want or pursuing what they really want, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. So see, you're having some empathy.
Yeah, I am. I'm just, it is funny. She set it up pretty both. I can feel both the pain and how deep this might go, but the specific example of the pasta sauce, I think both demonstrates how pervasive this issue is, but also points out the absurdity of it. And for that, I was trying to match that energy.
I get you. And that's always your go-to. Should we change then and see how this may have become more generalized? As she's saying that it sounds like it's not just the family. It's now, it's controlling a lot of his life.
A lot of his life. He doesn't trust his own mind, I think.
It does seem that culturally we are so dependent on 5-star reviews. We all want that at
In
all times.
fact, we are going to beg all of these listeners for a 5-star review
right?
in, some number of minutes.
Because how could we be valid otherwise?
Right. I don't know if it's generational, and I'm probably going to date myself now, but I think some of my friends, like millennial and younger, are really into this, at looking at the Yelp reviews for everything or trying to get the best or the idea that there's a best. And I get that on some level, but especially when I'm traveling, I think it takes out some of the, I don't know, wonder and excitement of discovery or things like that. That, maybe you just stumble upon something, or maybe you have a really bad experience and it's hilarious. Like, I don't know. I guess the pressure for everything to be 5-star, it feels pretty intense. Like maybe I want it for my podcast or a few other things, but pasta sauce, I'll roll the dice.
I wanted to put Sarah onto some research by psychologist Barry Schwartz. He wrote a book, The Paradox of Choice, about 20 years ago, roughly.
This is like the optimizers and...
Yeah, the
right?
satisficers. Yeah.
Okay, right.
There's a really popular TED Talk if you want like a 20-minute version. The very short version is that we think that we have to have a lot of choices in order to feel free. So we're obsessed with getting as many options as possible in as many realms of our lives as possible, not just consumer goods, relationships, parenting approaches, careers. But all those choices leave us feeling anxious. So we look for even more options because we can't find the right one. And then we're left paralyzed by the burden of choosing, which actually makes us more dissatisfied. And we're never actually happy with the choice we make. And then we're just generally unhappy as a result.
Isn't 3, if I remember this right, 3 is about the right number of options before your happiness starts to go down?
Yeah, right. Which is because at least with that, you're like, I picked the right, because you know that you did this best you could, right? But if you're choosing,
you did the best you could, or right, or even if it's like, I like to go with the middle of the road. I'm not going to go with the most expensive. I'm not going to go with the cheapest. Well, I think that comes up in like dating too, this idea that there's, limitless choices on these apps where sometimes I'm like, well, if we all still just lived on farms, you'd have to pick from the 10 guys that you went to high school with and decide to be happy.
Yeah. But if I just keep looking, it's a volume game, I will find the perfect person.
So, right. And everything is an opportunity cost. Yeah. Right. I mean, if you settle with one person, what if the optimal absolute best person? What if you have like a 9.8, but a 9.9 you'd meet next week? What are you going to do?
That's right. And you just described a maximizer. So I wanted to break this out.
Okay.
So Schwartz pulled some ideas from an economist whose name I can't remember right now. And he talked about these two kind of decision makers, the maximizers and the satisficers. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, that's a portmanteau of satisfy and suffice. So it'll be self-explanatory in a second. But the maximizers are perfectionistic. They have to know that every choice they make is the best. And the only way you would know that is if you considered every choice. But of course, you can't actually measure all the choices. And so they're never confident in what they've decided. There is this fear of missing out, though, which I think, again, is so culturally pervasive. Yeah. And you were talking about this, because whatever choice you make, there's always going to be a trade-off. You always have to give something up, which means you can never have a perfect choice. And if you're only focused on what you gave up and not what you gained, then you'll be unhappy. Whereas the satisficers, they pick an option that's good enough. It satisfies a criteria and it suffices. And they don't worry that there might be something better on the other side.
Are these people happier?
And so they're happier. Yeah. I think this crowdsourcing, this idea that you're going to live and die on a 5-point scale, is a way for the maximizers to try to live with less anxiety and disappointment. Because now they are sharing the decision making, and that I think that makes them feel a little bit more confident in what's going on. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So I'm wondering if Sarah's boyfriend, that's what he's struggling with.
I wonder if there's another part of that though that's kind of empty, or it depends how are we rating the best, right? Like 5 stars, are we rating on quality, on style, on value, on, I think it's also, okay, I can go around and say, I'm serving you spaghetti with the absolute best spaghetti sauce, but like based on what criteria? And it erases the idea that there are individual preferences, which then if this guy is crowdsourcing with the family about what's best, then do you just get the average thing that most people like? But what if that's not specific to his needs? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I bet it's often not specific to his needs.
But it's at least comforting to know that enough people have joined you, I think, in the decision that you don't have to feel... It's a comforting delusion. Well, right. But it at least allays some of the anxiety that there might be something better. At least if we're all having it at dinner, we'll all suffer, or we'll all benefit equally. I don't know.
No, and don't get me wrong. I get the temptation and the impulse, the desire behind it. I mean, I have definitely spent hours on the internet looking for the right ski goggles or something. I mean, I'm not beyond this, especially when the internet provides you with all these choices. And maybe it is about values where I feel like, well, the things that I want to get reviews on, like ski gear, seems much more important than pasta sauce. But maybe this guy's a foodie. Like maybe some part of this is about priorities, and that some things can be crowdsourced or rated, and some things you should try to be a satisficer. I don't like that word.
I'm the same way. I think the decision has to have a certain magnitude. Like for me, it's
Right.
a financial cost or something that I think would have a long-term consequence.
Right. Or an actual performance of something, right?
Yeah. So I was going to mention to Sarah, I'm in a mixed marriage. I tend to be a maximizer. My wife is definitely a satisficer. And I'm okay with that because it's actually consistent with my other personality traits. I would say I'm not as extreme as Sarah's boyfriend, but in my relationship, I wouldn't say this is something that causes rupture because we each know this about each other. We can talk about it if it's starting to get in the way. But I would say from a maximizer's point of view, we think the satisficers aren't taking things seriously enough. And the satisficers think that we're taking things too seriously. But yeah, if it's over pasta sauce, you're taking it too seriously. If it's,
well, I mean, right, like there maybe it's just like a lack of proportionality here, right? If he really can't rank which things should be private or public and which things should be, easily decided on versus agonized over, then that does seem like a really painful way to live. That's like the worst of all worlds.
Yeah.
And so if something just needs to be decided, do you hand it over to your wife? I mean, how do you guys manage that?
No. So what we agree on is that I'm allowed to go into the rabbit hole of choices, and I'll emerge with just a handful. And then because she probably doesn't really care anyway, then she can just decide, make an affirmation of what she wants.
So then you give her 3 and then she gets to be happy.
And I suffer.
Well, you get to be righteous. I mean, that's worth something, isn't it?
Always is.
I mean, right? There's some martyrdom in there. But anyway, moving on.
So I found a twin study.
Oh boy.
Now, it was in the Journal of Consumer Research. I don't subscribe to that journal.
I'm not familiar.
So they did a twin study showing that this maximizer principle may be a heritable trait, which I just thought was interesting. I don't know if it's a good study or not. But I did think it was interesting that her boyfriend's family is just all afflicted with this style of decision maker. So maybe there's a genetic component, and almost certainly there's a social component that this is how he was raised to be this way.
They're training each other to do it. It's definitely reinforcing.
Yeah. And if Sarah and this guy have a kid, it's going to be expected of him or her too.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the beginning where I say run. Right?
We do have to wrap this up.
So, okay, yes, Dave, to your point, I have empathy for both of your positions, even if it seems, at least per the question, that he has gone way too far in some of these. And maybe he could recognize that he is losing out on some satisfaction or time by going to Reddit for things. And maybe peeling away from Reddit a little bit is easier than peeling away from his family. And if he could kind of in a stepwise way, he would have to decide this was important to him, practice making decisions for himself, practice making decisions, without an undue amount of research. He might be able to build some confidence in terms of what he wants and asserting that, and sometimes settling or deciding to be satisfied or sufficed or whatever. And then maybe over time, that makes it easier to set some boundaries with his family. But since this is the soup he's been raised in, I think it's going to be a long process.
All right. When we get back, we need to try to make sense of what one of our listeners overheard, that a patient must view their therapist in a positive light and then learn to hate them.
Dancing just you and me. Cha-cha-cha.
We got some feedback about our last episode, number 27. The anonymous listener gave us some additional information and context, not meant to be shared on the show, but it sounds like we were onto something and our discussion was helpful. She did say, "I'm not a people pleaser, but thought I'd go ahead and indulge your desire to feel brilliant. Your answers were truly helpful." So we love to feel brilliant, and we appreciate.
No, thank you. That truly feels good. It means a lot.
No, it really does. And we hope that other folks will get back to us as well. We love hearing from you.
Thank you.
We also had a 5-star review from Colleen. Great topic and discussion. I really enjoyed today's episode about interpretations in therapy. Thank you for talking about the experience from both sides of the couch. Next time I'm feeling resistant to my therapist and their input, I'll remember this episode.
That's a pretty nice one, too. I don't know, Dave. I'm going to go into this next question all smiles. We'll see how that affects things.
This question comes from CH. Is this really true? From a recent lecture in my psychodynamic therapy course, quote, babies must love their caregivers first, but must eventually learn to hate them as well. Similarly, the patient must first view the therapist in a positive light, but eventually must learn to hate them, end quote. If so, why? I don't understand the principle. I've been in therapy for 3 years and enjoy the work I do with my therapist. We are serious about what we do, we have a lot in common, and we're making progress. Why does it eventually have to include hate? I got to tell you, CH, this is a messy analogy. I think it's pretty lazy.
Yeah.
Even for an offhanded comment, it sounds more like a soundbite or a tweet and less of a lecture.
Yeah, it's too simplistic and flippant, and I don't know.
There's just a lot of theory that's packed away in a throwaway line, I would say. And I don't think that it's wrong, but, patients don't like to be compared to babies either.
Right. And I already have children. I'm not there trying to be somebody's mother. I'm really not. It's okay.
But I think, we can unpack it for you and at least give you some ideas. I don't think it would be within the scope of maybe everybody listening for us to go through all the theory with you, but Why don't we start with the baby caregiver part of the analogy?
Mm-hmm.
And the best place to start there is with psychiatrist Margaret Mahler and her theories on ego development. So she described the normal developmental process of separation and individuation between a young child and their mother. Later we'll say caregiver, but back then it was just mother-child.
Right. Dads just came home and had a bourbon. So
That's right.
Oh, those were the days.
The good old days. So this process gets repeated in similar ways and in different ways in adolescence. If we jump ahead, the other side of the developmental process is a person who's independent, has agency, but can also be in relationships with other people and get their interpersonal needs met. They can be independent and they can also be dependent on others when they need to be. That's when everything goes well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's a specific stage of this process called the rapprochement. And there's even sub-stages to it. We're not going to get into that, but this is important. I think before I describe it, let me just give you a picture. So you've got a toddler running down a path away from their caregiver. They are drunk with power. They've had this new realization that they can control the world. They can make things fall. They can make the cat scream. They can make their caregiver respond in certain ways. And so here they go, barreling into independence, and then they realize that the caregiver isn't as close as they normally would be. And now they're devastated because how dare you abandon me? And so to reestablish the closeness, they might fall down, they might cry, maybe they'll kick. This is the age when any attention is better than you letting me die alone on this path. And so what we're talking about then is that tension between a child becoming independent while also still being dependent. That being said, I don't think hate is really the right word here.
I think that's right. In essence, what you just described in a toddler, and again, this is not meant to be infantilizing at all, but I think someone maybe with borderline personality dynamics who is regressed or in a really stressed state could have the same thing. There's a famous book about that type of personality called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, for example, or, just this absolute split in terms of needing to see / only being able to see the caregiver as all good or all bad. And so I think part of it has to be about appreciating both sides of that dynamic. And so maybe even if I agree, I don't think it has to include hate, but if I'm giving a more generous interpretation of this quote, I think it's about maybe experiencing the love and the hate, but not stopping there. And then in the end, being able to integrate those, which is also what happens when things go well with an older child as they move out of toddlerhood. They're not going to be quite as erratic or have as big as swings in their mood and affect, if you will.
Yeah. We were talking about when things go the way we expect them to go versus when
But if somebody got stuck there or didn't get their needs met at that phase, that might occur later in life with attachment figures or loved ones, authority figures, bosses, things like that, or just when the person's really stressed.
Yeah. And then as you're saying with older kids, so adolescents go through a lot as they mature and they have similar crises. We've talked about this on other episodes because we're parents of tweens, when the child's ready for the world, but then they still need to reestablish connection with you. They want to be close. They want to cuddle. They want to still feel protected and cared for, even as they are then repelled by you or they're revulsed by you because they're independent. And then teenagers also have to navigate losing the caregiver as an idealized figure. So they begin to see that the parent's imperfect. And when they topple them off the pedestal, they often overcorrect and completely devalue them. But, if we skip ahead a lot, they ultimately can internalize the parent figure and realize that you can be loved by imperfect people.
And that you can be independent from someone who is still fundamentally good, right? I mean, I think because sometimes the function of that hate or toppling or just savage tween attack is a way to make themselves separate and kind of to assure that separateness. And again, that can be terrifying, but it's more of a, they haven't found the nuance in it yet, right? I mean, you kind of go too far, correct. Go too far the other way, correct. And so it's and especially as long as the parent doesn't retaliate, this rapprochement or this teenage individuation process ends up balancing out so that the extremes don't have to be so dramatic.
Yeah. I think
the swings don't have to be as extreme. The hate is provocative.
And that might actually fit sometimes in that context.
For sure.
Because of that need to separate, it becomes the main goal even of development in some certain stages.
Right. I mean, stereotypes exist for a reason, right? I'm sure they're, a teenager screaming, "I hate you," and slamming their door has been seen by everyone thousands of times in popular media. Just it's a good encapsulation.
All right, so if we go back to this analogy, now we have to see what are the parallels in some types of therapy. Now, of course, the therapist is the caregiver.
Right.
The patient's becoming dependent on the therapist for a lot of things, containing their emotion, naming things, making sense of a threatening world, which can be frustrating or repulsive, threatening in a lot of ways. And then similarly, as when I talked about the teenagers, they may idealize their therapist initially, but that can't be sustained because you're going to be disappointed. The therapist is human, and you may feel let down and disappointed, of course.
Yeah, I think that, sometimes being idealized can feel good, but, a lot of times I just think that's kind of a rookie mistake because I know if I'm being really idealized by a patient, I'm not going to be able to keep that up. And not that I would ever I just, in myself, and then will end up disappointing them, not intentionally. And then to go from, being absolutely loved to being absolutely hated happens. And I think they tend to be two sides of the same coin, especially if the idealization is especially intense and pure. It makes me nervous. It's going to flip. We're not staying there forever.
Oh, sure.
By necessity. And you don't want to.
You don't want to. In the same way, you don't want the dependence to linger for too long. I mean, it's necessary in the beginning, but of course, part of the goal is to make them more independent, to internalize you, resolve the identity crisis, and move forward. And then you brought up the fact, though, that there are certain personality traits, there are conditions where a person might be more regressed, stressed out, and that can lead to a lot more anger. I mean, because it really does feel like those earlier conflicts, and it is happening in the room. So, yeah, is there hate that's happening there? I mean, maybe as part of that process.
Sometimes absolutely. And sometimes I think that needs to get expressed. But yeah, to your point, I mean, when CH is wondering about his own therapy, he says it's been going on for 3 years and it's going well. And that sounds wonderful. But you're right. We don't know what type of therapy. Even in a psychodynamic therapy, a once a week type of treatment might not be enough to facilitate that closeness or vulnerability, set the stage for some regression sometime to feel some of those earlier things. I mean, they may be in a place where CH can feel adult and secure and in charge and working on a lot of good things, but maybe, not surprised and maybe protected in a certain way, consciously or not, from getting in deeper, from getting more dependent and feeling some of those ugly early feelings. Because like you said, our patients don't want to be compared to babies, and they definitely don't want to feel like babies either.
Yeah.
Most of the time. It feels awful. It's scary. It's terrible. Nobody likes to feel powerless. Nobody likes to feel dependent. And, recognizing that as something to be worked through, whether that involves hate or something else, okay. Does it eventually have to include hate to be a good treatment? Absolutely not. But definitely some analysts or analyst types would say that is part of it. Again, in the idea, I guess, that you're doing some analogous development process where the parental figure is incorporated as a whole human by the end of it.
That's what I say. Of course, it does not have to include hate. And even if it did, that's still a transitory state. It's not,
that's what I mean. Like, you don't stop there. It's like, oh, love, hate, mission accomplished, check, check.
But the way the little quip was made, it was almost as if that's how you know you were done. And it's like, well, no,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
just the early part of the process. In the same way that with your child, yeah, I mean, if they have a successful development, hopefully, to become independent agents, yeah, you get past it. You get to the other side of it.
And I'm someone who definitely had some rageful hate towards my therapist, and now with some space from it. I sort of can't believe that happened. But if I'm being honest, I can't believe how much I idealized him either, right?
Mm-hmm.
I care about him a lot. I think he's great. I recognize how much he helped me. But in terms of getting in touch with those really intense emotions, like that's not there anymore. And it's sort of hard for me to imagine getting back to that. And like, that actually feels good. That feels like a part of what was really accomplished. Like, oh, we can just keep being people in the world.
Yeah, that's nice, right?
It is. Yeah.
And that he was unconditionally there.
Yes, absolutely. I did not destroy him with my rage, despite my best efforts.
I know, right? You're so good at it.
Listen, I mean, there is some part of, at least for me and probably for other people, of really testing that limit of what's too much. And I was lucky to have someone who could withstand a lot and be a good container. And we made it through. But do I wish that I would have gotten there without that? Probably. But at least for me, I don't think it would have been as powerful an experience if I didn't get to express that as well. I try to tell my patients that are entering into a deeper type of therapy, it's okay, to express all your feelings that you have towards me, towards the treatment, positive, negative. And sometimes people will say, I can't imagine us getting to a place where we're mad at each other, don't like each other, or whatever. And it's like, that's okay. Like, and I'm not trying to make it happen. It doesn't have to happen. Sometimes I try to flag it because I don't want the person to defend against it as much, but I don't think it works. Like, it either happens or it doesn't. But I think there can be a tendency on both the therapist and the patient side to keep away from those negative feelings because they are painful. And so maybe for CH, who sounds like he's in training, maybe part of what I would like for him too is just to be open to the idea that if the hate comes, it is also useful.
Well said.
Thanks.
And don't get sidetracked by lazy proclamations.
That's right. Push back on that lecturer and ask more questions. That's what they're there for.
All right. Thank everyone for listening. And thanks to Sarah and CH for the questions. If you have questions, send an email or leave an audio message at our website, callthepsychiatrist.com. You can also message us on Instagram or Facebook at Call the Psychiatrist. And finally, share an episode you liked with somebody. We'd love for the show to keep growing. Take care.
Bye.